Next speaker is Terry Murphy from Teesside University.
I'm just getting over the flu, so sorry if that exacerbates my natural Scouse accent anyway. What I'd like to do today, we've been talking a lot about neoconservatism. I'd like to introduce you to the world of neoconservative social work, because it's very important to realise that neoconservatives are not simply in organisations out there. There is now a significant neoconservative supporting group within the world of social work. And I'd like to introduce you to it, show you a little bit about how it works. Firstly, what is neocon social work? Well, we've always had conservative social work traditions in social work from its beginning in the 19th century, often focused on religious or other communities' interests or philanthropic organisations. They've got a long history. Barnardo's, NSPCC would be examples in the UK. They're essentially liberal in motivation. They offer supplements to state services. That's quite different from the neocon model of social work. Neoconservative social work interests attempt to supplant or replace state social work and are characterised by, firstly, hostility to organised labour, promotion of elitist practitioners, and the replacement of state social work with private providers and state-certified education, such as degrees offered by universities, with privately owned IP models of social work. So that's ways of doing social work which are actually owned by a company. So, what do we see in the development of neocon social work, which has been vastly accelerated, in particular under the Minister Gove that we've had as part of the Conservative, I should say Liberal as well, but let's call it what it is, Conservative government of the last 5 years. The first is the elevation of management into a moral good in itself. Neoconservative social work worships management. We had a report in 2014 by a former head of the prison service, Martin Neri, and Barnardo's, which was meant to supplant earlier work done on developing a modern social work curricula. And this again is typical of the political brutality of the neocon social work project. So liberal organisations which have been set up, such as the College of Social Work, the usual thing that we do within social work, which is gather large numbers of social work academics and practitioners together and trying to evolve newer models of social work. This was simply binned overtly by Gove and the neocons, who asked a single person, Martin Neri, to travel around the country and decide on the direction of social work. And what he decided, strangely enough, was that one of the big problems with social work is that there's too much radical social work taught in the universities. So there are explicit attacks on radical and progressive social work. Now, the government departments responsible for social work in the UK have since been vastly increasing the amount of money being spent on promoting privately owned social work models, with copyright on intellectual property rights usually located in the US, because the US has the most aggressive lawyers in this respect. And these neoconservative groups within social work have received large amounts of political backing from organisations involved in banking, management consultancy, and right-wing in particular, American Christian charitable groups. The two particular elements we've seen over the last 5 years are the creation of an organisation known as the Front Line, which is the actual opposite of what it says, and which exists to create an officer class within social work. And the second model that we see is the increase in influence and networking of private consultants selling private models of social work practice. This isn't something that is happening in the future, this is happening right now in England and Wales, and represents a major diversion between practice in Scotland and practice in England and Wales. Now, you may recognise this man. One of the major characteristics of neoconservative social work, it has major political lobbying and support the Prime Minister, David Cameron, who's overseen the biggest cuts to social work, in particular in England and Wales, in a generation, this is him making a video available on the Frontline website talking about how much he supports social work. All of the party leaders make explicit statements in a series of videos supporting this neoconservative social work model, Frontline. It takes a lot of political pull to get every political leader of a country supporting one social work programme and talking as though the other 100 social work programmes and the other 60 plus master's degrees do not exist. Frontline itself arose from a left liberal think tank called IPPR, which is led by a guy called Josh McAllister, who's a creature of the SPAD and political lobbyist kind, who's actually now leading this extremely well-funded group. Unfortunately, Josh, who's in his late 20s, has not actually ever worked in social work, but doesn't seem to find that a disadvantage in telling all the rest of us how to actually do social work. This programme gives an MA not in social work, and that's important. It gives a master's degree in social work leadership. It has 200 students. It explicitly attracts preferably from Oxbridge graduates, but will consider slumming it with Russell Group graduates if it has to. There's a constant repetition of rhetoric about attracting the brightest and the best. There's a partner program for adult social work, Think Ahead, same ideology, and a new one for social work management, First Line. They all have these sort of, trendy titles sounding like a privatised bus company of some sort or another. Frontline makes a big deal of using, in its recruitment methods, of using some of the same tests as are used by MI5. Why that would attract you into going for a particular programme, in his next film, James Bond will privatise Birmingham Children's Services. And this is the kind of ideological bump that gets put out there. The important thing to notice big emphasis on leadership. The first specialist educational input these students get is off a tax avoidance company. No joke. Qualify after 13 months, and every 4 of these students gets their own consultant social worker, or as they used to be called in downtown Abbey, butler, to see them through this programme. It has a big knock-on effect, because part of the Frontline contract drawn up with social work departments, they're in 24 local authorities by the way, is to exclude other social work education providers from offices and locations where these students are put, and they also get first choice of any cases available. So really, really setting up a completely biased playing field. First Line is the partner programme for management. There's some of the sponsors. They include one of the most right-wing management consultancies available, a fundamentalist Christian charity which is devoted to small government and promoting charities as opposed to government services, and a number of merchant banks. Typical people we'd look for in social work. It's based on an earlier model developed for education, and this programme was successful in developing a professional cadre of graduates favourable to the privatisation of public services. Graduates from this earlier programme now hold management positions in 70% of the academies which replaced local government schools and destroyed public accountability for the primary and secondary education system in England and Wales. So, they've done this before, now it's social work's turn. This is the kind of advertising they're pumping out on the media. This was from a recent press highlight. A politician, a member of the royal family, a senior banker and a poet have spent their time trying their hand at child protection social work. Well, how very useful. It's very important to note, theoretically, that they have adapted a lot of our language from progressive social work and radical social work. They talk a lot about transformative practice, the courage to change systems. They don't run training courses, they run boot camps. And they talk about taking a leap of faith in developing these new systems. We've seen the creation, as part of this neocon social work, of a chief social worker post, Isabel Trowler, famously anti-union in her previous life in local government. We've seen the disempowerment wholesale of social work education courses. No social work education course in England and Wales will now be able to qualify someone to do children and family social work or child protection social work. You'll get a degree, you'll get your master's degree, but before you can practice, you have to take a test developed by KPMG Management Consultancy and Morning Lane Associates, who were paid £2 million. Strangely enough, Isabel Trowler used to own Morning Lane Associates. As we used to say in child protection when we were investigating someone dodgy, that's interesting. The licence that this group will give is linked explicitly to frontline practice approaches. And that's one of the things I want to say. This is a very network group. Very network group. Social work competencies are to be determined by the chief social worker alone, not by social work education programmes. So we see something very typical of the neocons. There's a lot of small state rhetoric, a lot of diversity rhetoric, but we see the centralisation of state power, which is always present in neoconservative approaches. We see the erasure of a lot of social work history. Success is attached with minimal evidence to neocon departments. Hackney is constantly referenced, despite the fact that there were 25 local authorities doing better than Hackney at the same time in their childcare social work practice. They are never mentioned. They are erased from history. Again, neocons are very good at being Stalinists. They just erase from the picture parts of the public sector which are too successful. Even in terms of internationalisation, the most successful international social work model is the assessment triangle, used in the developing world context throughout just a huge number of countries, developed by the public sector in the UK. But these successes of the public sector are just erased. A bit like East Coast Rail, the most successful rail company, more than any of the private companies, but let's not mention that. Resource issues and political culture are removed, and they're replaced with an emphasis on public sector culture as unitary and pathological. We have the elevation. Whenever you see systemic family therapy or brief solution focused therapy mentioned now, often it's by these neoconservative companies. None of the models recognises the service user as someone capable of political organisation. They are always the objects of service. I have to give you one of the worst examples here. The Pause Project. The Conservatives have put 100 million taken out of local government into something called the Innovations Project. Again, Hackney, the Pause Project, is developed on providing services to working class women, disproportionately poor, and disproportionately from the BME population, who were placed on a compulsory contraception programme. Let's have a think about that in 2015. There's an increased networking of powerful private consultancies. The average private consultant I'm talking about earns over $1 million a year. This is their next conference. Revolution. They're not talking about the same sort of revolution as we might be talking about here. They're talking about how to make more money. These powerful private companies are networking. You pay to be able to use their models. You pay a fee, and then you pay 10% of your earnings to these companies in order to be accredited as a trainer. They talk about diverse providers. They really mean privatisation of services. They talk about innovation, they mean the promotion of privately owned IP copyrighted models. When an American university attempted to produce a course critical of one of these models, they received a lawyer's letter saying that if they mentioned this model without permission, they would be sued as individuals and an institution. Funnily enough, they didn't go any further. There's an explicit threat to withdraw state funding for courses teaching radical curricula, and the same Prime Minister who's talking about promoting social work in Frontline is the same guy who you may not realise if you're from another country is threatening 5-year jail sentences for social workers not following the government's views on risk. So, finish in 30 seconds. What do we need to do? First of all, we need to realise how well developed the neoconservatives are in social work. They're not a large group, they're an enormously powerful group in terms of the political backing and the financial muscle they've got. We need to move away from the letter writing of the liberal academy. As one of the academics who are pretty secondary in this world, who's involved with this, promoting it, was told that virtually the whole of the social work academy was against this. He said, so what? It's going to happen anyway. We need to network affected service users and trade union groups across different local authorities to highlight these networks of influence and personal gain for key decision makers. And we really need to challenge the appropriation of progressive language and name the reality. If this is a revolution, it's not the right sort of revolution. Thank you.